Well, Lloyd Axworthy was Foreign Affairs Minister in the Jean Chrétien government, a time in his life that he has addressed in his recently released memoir, Lloyd Axworthy, My Life in Politics. You see it right there. Mr. Axworthy, thank you for joining us again.
Nice to be here, Michael. Thank you.
So let's begin with Charlevoix, because obviously the foreign ministers of the G7 are gathered there right now. And when they talk about priorities, we heard it from Mélanie Joly herself. It is a number of issues, but topping the list is Ukraine. So beginning with Ukraine, it now seems that the idea of a ceasefire is becoming more of a reality. Right. So Ukraine has signed on. Vladimir Putin apparently is going to be met about it tonight by a U.S. envoy. What is your feeling about that ceasefire and the situation in Ukraine? Because certainly people have been wary, given that Donald Trump has been more praising of Vladimir Putin than he has been of Vladimir Zelensky.
Well, I mean, I think the Ukrainians are paying a big price for this. They signing off in large part of their mineral wealth, but that to get some kind of conclusion to the fighting for a period of time is worth it. I mean, I think there's what I think is interesting about Canada's chairing of the G7 now, beginning at the meetings, is that we were really the author of the whole idea of repurposing frozen Russian investment assets, $300 billion worth, and using it to compensate Ukraine for the damage, for the destruction. And there was pushback, Michael, from some of the European countries and bankers and stuff. But now it's looked upon as really the only way in which some rebuilding, some compensation can take place. So I would hope that these meetings would solidify and consolidate that Canadian initiative and bring it forward. And secondly, I think it's clearly a platform for Minister Joly, for the finance minister in May, and the leader, whomever that will be, in June, to actually get an international platform about what's happening on tariffs, what's happening on intervention, and to mobilize other people around the world about what's going on in the Trump administration.
And to that, Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, is in Charlevoix right now. What are you looking out for in terms of what he might say vis-a-vis Ukraine and Russia?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that they're not going to countenance any sort of statement that condemns the Russian aggression. But if they can get a statement endorsing the need for a peaceful settlement without sort of a takeover by Russia of large amounts of Ukrainian space, then that could be a constructive positioning. I think there's a real balance here, and I think clearly we have to weigh on the side of making sure that the security of Ukraine. What has to be surrendered for that? I'm concerned, because the problem with a ceasefire is it may just give a pause for Putin and the Russians to rebuild and get ready to do it again.
Which has always been a Ukrainian concern. But,
That's right.
it also, you talk about balance, but I think the imbalance that's now caused by Donald Trump, because people are worried about Russia in Europe, people are worried about whether or not the United States will come in and help them, has led Poland, for example, the Baltic states, now all talking about abandoning the Ottawa Convention to go back to landmines as a way of protecting them from Russian invasion. What's your reaction to that?
Oh, I'm really pretty really concerned about this kind of, it's almost becoming a knock-on effect. You know, there's been a consistent effort by right-wing and military groups to try to disband the Ottawa Treaty because they just don't like disarmament. They just don't like surrendering weapons. This has given them a kind of an opportunity. I think, frankly, we have to blame Joe Biden for this, because he's the one that conceded to the Ukrainians that they can now use anti-personnel mines. And once he opened that door, then everybody else is following through. So I've, along with Anne Delorme from Humanity Inclusion, we've sent a letter off to Minister Joly, urging her as a for Canada to take a real stand with these other countries and say, not only are you going to provide for a snowball effect of other countries, you're also going to undermine the whole concept of disarmament. And that means that you have a Wild West system, people rearming, and there's no longer any restraint.
No longer any restraint. Do you think that there's a chance of convincing Poland and the Baltic states not to follow that path?
Well, I think it depends on the effectiveness of your diplomacy. I mean, we've got a brigade already in Latvia. We show there. It may well be that we have to, again, reset the kind of security arrangements we have. But I certainly think that it's really that Canada should be taking the lead in convincing people there are other ways of offsetting the Russian. If they want to have some kind of early warning system of people coming across the border, landmines are not the way to do it. Like, already, Ukraine is so corrupted with landmines, it's going to take them tens of decades to even begin clearing up the mess so that large parts of their country can be used again for agriculture and for peaceful existence. You want to now spread that to Finland and Poland and Lithuania? I mean, that just opens Pandora's box.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll keep watching where that goes, considering that you were, of course, one of the chief architects of the Ottawa Treaty. But I also want to talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, because while the foreign ministers gather, we have right now as well the United States engaged in a trade war with Canada, with Europe. The United States, Donald Trump in particular, continuing his talk of a 51st state completely being disrespectful of Canadian sovereignty. What do you hope comes out of a one-to-one meeting between Melanie Joly and Marco Rubio on that subject? Or do you think she can even raise it with the U.S. Secretary of State?
Oh, it should be raised without question. And it should be raised not just with Marco Rubio, it should be raised with the other members of the G7 and saying, what we have a kind of a situation where one of the members of the G7 is threatening the sovereignty existence of another member. Do we tolerate that, or do we start putting some pushback, some containment on those issues? Big question, by the way, that you might want to explore. I was asked the question, do you think Trump will actually show up at the Kananaskis in June? And someone pointed out to me that to be allowed to come to Canada as a committed felon, he's going to have an exemption in our law. I'm not sure Donald Trump is going to be thrilled about that opportunity.
Yeah, which people have been talking about. But you also took part in a rally, the Elbows Up rally, this past Sunday, and that does go to Canadian sovereignty. And I guess if there's any good to come out of the rhetoric that we've been hearing from Donald Trump is the fact that we're now seeing this rebirth of Canadian nationalism. We're seeing great unity amongst Canadians right now. What do you hope Canadians do with this burst of pride, this rediscovered pride, and this determination to stand up against American annexation?
Well, in the book I wrote, I said that Canada really needed a kick in the pants just to start rethinking who we are. Trump is giving us a kick in the teeth, which is a little more severe. But I think it's an opportunity for us to say, look, do we really want to put all our economic eggs in one basket? Do we simply want to have our military so entangled with the American military that our discretion and independence of movement is limited? And we're buying airplanes where the digital box is going to be basically large parts of it will be sort of monitored by the Pentagon. I mean,
and that's the F-35 you're talking about.
That's the F-35, and the same thing with the so-called new destroyers. We're going to buy sort of off-the-shelf American digital centers and codes, but they will have control of it. I mean, if it ever comes down to a question, say in the Arctic, where America is, as it has in the past, challenged our sovereignty, our 200-mile zone, we want to push back. Well, you don't want to push back if some guy in Washington, D.C. Has control over where your ships and your planes can go.
Now, there hasn't been talk about the F-35. There has been talk about other defense contracts. F-35, of course, a multi-billion-dollar program.
Right.
Are you surprised that hasn't been talked about more openly about canceling that contract and perhaps
Yes, I
pursuing
am.
one with the Europeans?
Yeah, I think that, frankly, it would be a mistake to continue from a point of view of ensuring that our independence of action is preserved. And then I have no idea whether Mr. Carty will be able to exercise that. He'll be a prime minister, but the other that's problematic is that before we get to the big G7 meeting of leaders, we're going to have an election. So who's going to show up from Canada? And are we going to be fighting, spitballing, when we really want to be showing a united front? There's a real conundrum there, Michael, that has to, as you know, I've argued that one thing that should happen is that Parliament should be recalled briefly on the basis of actually having a unified all-party statement. But I don't see any inclination right now for that to happen.
Yeah, in fact, it looks like we're headed for an election sooner than later.
Absolutely. And it would be an opportunity lost, because I think the G7 meeting could be a really interesting and important place in which Canada can exercise its real diplomatic power to bring other countries inside, to put some statements about a G7 member should not be threatening another G7 member. We should be putting those things frontward. Would Trump like it? Would Marco Rubio? Of course not. But we shouldn't back down, and from what I can see, I think we're in a good position. I think Canadians would support that, 98%.
Well, as we say, the Charlevoix meeting is the G7 foreign ministers. Kananaskis will be the G7 leaders. A lot to be watching. Lloyd Axworthy, I always appreciate the time. Thank you.
Nice to be here, Michael. Thank you.